And welcome to season 2, episode 4 of the QCast. And wow, have I been waiting for this one. I'm joined by Mr. Dave McHugh, a legend in Division III circles, the broadcast director at d3sports.com, the host, the founder of Hoopsville. I've been waiting a long time, Dave, to be on the other side of the interview. I've been waiting 20 years for this stupid show. Thank you for joining me, Dave. It's awesome to have you. How are you doing? It's been a while since we've chatted. How's everything going?
Things are going well. It's going to be strange to say this. The coronavirus pandemic, while scary, was hell for my career in the sense of bringing money in for the family, was good for me medically. One, got an unintended break from D3, and I'll apologize now, like I will on the show, for all the fans who didn't get all the shows that they expected. There had to be a line between how long do we really drag this all out, to be fully honest. Sorry, if you're watching, I put contacts in shortly before this, and they always water up, and I always forget that fact.
I thought you were getting sentimental about.
I am getting a little
being on the other side of this interview with me, but now that I know it's just
being on the other end, I'm a little anxiety driven. No, it's really, for medically, I needed it. I had a major surgery to fix my back, which you certainly saw the beginnings of, and it wasn't the best of surgeries. We don't need to go into all those details. People have certainly seen it who know me. There were complications. I ended up spending a number of weeks in the hospital, which was unexpected. And took 4 months before I really came around the corner. But once I came around the corner, it's been gangbusters since. My back feels pretty good, considering I got to get back into some habits to fix some, to keep it strong. But I mean, I've lost weight. I feel better. I can do things with my kids now. And as a result, there was a bit of a break from my D3 work, especially in the pandemic. It just kind of was like two storms coming together and colliding. I needed the break and I didn't know it. Pandemic gave me an excuse that I wasn't intending. We can probably talk about this later. I worked my tail off trying to understand the world of where D3 was going to be with the NCAA championships. And I talked to more coaches and ADs, and I was slamming until they made that decision. And to be honest with you, I didn't even realize it for a while, but my brain and my body just said, yeah, we're done. See you later. And I shut down a bit, and I needed it though. I needed it. So I'm in great shape. I'm gung ho. I'm busy right now, which is good, and looking forward to the season.
Well, you look great. It's there's been a lot of people asking about you, obviously, with some of the health scares that you've had. You've been pretty public about all that, and I know that the D3 community has been behind you. So we're all glad to hear that you're doing great. And look, we're a couple days away here, not quite the eve, but we're a couple days away from the debut of the 19th season of Hoopsville. You're going to have a show. We'll get into this, but you'll have a show this coming Sunday at 7:00 Eastern. And we're going to get into the origins of Hoopsville. And I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about, but one of the things I like to ask people that I have on here, Dave, is their D3 story. I find these things interesting. All of us that have ended up connected to Division III, there's some cool story, and sometimes it's just like a happenstance sort of thing. I wanted to start there with you because I'm not sure everyone knows your D3 story. Walk us through how you got connected with Division III athletics.
Yeah, nothing prototypical, nothing typical, I should say. When I was in high school, I played every sport I could get my hands on, junior high, et cetera. And so I wouldn't say I was a stellar athlete, but I was an athlete. And I went to a prep school in Connecticut that had really high-end athletics, and I wasn't necessarily varsity on everything, but I certainly dabbled with them. But then I took a gap year, and I traveled for a year with who are now dear friends of mine in a whole nother world. I traveled 6 months States, 6 months Europe. College took a back seat, but I had been looking at schools like Worcester and Ohio Wesleyan and Hartwick, Hamilton. Bit of a reach. Thought Legacy could get me in there. Didn't, luckily. Virginia Wesley, some of the schools that I looked at, and I was looking at baseball. I was a little stubborn. Okay, I'm very stubborn. And I thought baseball was something I could play in the future, when I was overlooking an obvious sport, and that was soccer. So after the gap year, or during the gap year, I got interested in what now became my alma mater, Goucher. And not for athletics. I actually got interested because of the drama program and because of the music program, which is what I was doing when I was traveling. It's something behind the scenes that I've always enjoyed. And I ended up at Goucher, but just before I arrived, the then coach reached out and said, "Hey, let's be honest, you're a male. You're coming to a formerly single-sex college. We need men. I'm short on the soccer team, and I apparently see you played soccer. Would you be interested?" I was like, "Oh, sure." Just completely naive. And then they had a coaching change. Didn't bother me. I didn't even go to preseason because I was still recovering from the year I traveled, and I showed up and I made the soccer team as a backup. And long story short, I did very little drama. I did very little music. It didn't become what I thought it was going to be. And the next thing I know, I'm working in the sports information office. I become the PA announcer for basketball my freshman year, something that kind of dovetailed off of what I'd done from traveling. I played officially 2 seasons of soccer, but I was involved for 4. Started and all that, but I got very involved with sports information. And at the time, my alma mater, Goucher, men's and women's basketball was really good. In hindsight, one of the seasons with men's basketball probably should have been a Final Four team. And if they hadn't laid an egg in the second round, basically at home. And so I announced home games. I got involved, and that's when D3 boards showed up and D3 hoops showed up. And I became that arrogant student who got onto the boards and went back and forth. I think Pat actually had a quote of mine on the boards for a while when Goucher legitimately got screwed out of the NCAA tournament. We don't have to go into that unless you want to hear the story. I think I've repeated it enough times, but they legitimately got screwed out. And I think I was paraphrased on the chat boards at the top, where Pat had a banner basically for a good 5-10 years. Pat and I had an head button relationship for a number of years because he's Catholic, I'm Goucher. That still is a rivalry, but it was heated back then. Lonergan and Trevino on the men's basketball side, and I'm in the middle as the PA announcer. I could go into all kinds of stories with that, but then really didn't know I was going. I actually did an internship with a TV station here in Baltimore, thanks to my athletics director, Jeff Miller, at the time. I had an internship to kill. He said, "Listen, why don't you try this? It's not in your major, but that doesn't matter. You've done the one in your major. So check it out. See if you like it." Fell in love with producing. Unofficially was an intern for them for several years before getting a part-time job just weeks before the Ravens won their first Super Bowl. And I'm in the studio, or in the station, is the only guy in basically the sports department, because everybody went to Tampa for the Super Bowl. So I'm running tape for news. I'm running tape. I'm editing not really editing, but editing highlights and everything, producing. And I loved it. And through that, Pat Coleman at one point called and said, "Hey, listen, I'm doing a game at Catholic. Would you like to come and do color commentary?" And I said, "Well, why the heck not? I've been dabbling with everything. I'm PA announcing still, sure." And that opened up another door. And so I did a color commentary for a number of times. And then through all of that, a radio station went defunct here in Baltimore. They created an online radio station before that was a thing, called onairsports.com. And I got asked to come in and kind of do stuff behind the scenes, which I learned on the fly, really. And they had some dead air time. So I started Hoopsville, and I mean, that dovetail, we'll get into that, I know. And then now I got into broadcasting, and then I truly fell in love with D3 through all of that. I not only as a student athlete playing collegiate soccer, and to be honest with you, through one of the rougher seasons I've ever played in, but seeing basketball compete at a national level. I got a chance to announce women's lacrosse my freshman year. They marched themselves to the Final Four, and they just got inducted into the Hall of Fame for the college. And so I got introduced to all these sports and into Division III as a whole, and I started wanting to learn more and more and more about it. And clearly D3 was in my blood from the get-go. So a long, convoluted way of walking my way into D3 sports. And then from there, I haven't wanted basketball to be my only one, even though basketball is the main catalyst for me. And I've loved every minute of it since. And why not tell the D3 story. Nobody else is. And that's not a knock at Pat or anybody. I just mean our group. So why not push it? And so, yeah, I don't know if it answered the full answer, but that's kind of how I just wandered, honestly, wandered my way into it.
It's perfect. And I do think it's cool to learn how all of these people kind of have come together in this community that's Division III, sports, like you said, not just basketball, but all the sports, both genders. I want to ask about Hoopsville, but first I just, sometimes people will ask me questions that will suggest they think that your full-time job is Hoopsville.
Oh, it is, right?
Yeah. And I'll have to say, those four dudes that work there at d3sports.com, like this is like a part-time passion thing. This is a hobby. This is something that they do because they love it. They all have real jobs out there. And talk a little bit about what you currently do outside of all the Division III stuff that people see. What's the day job for Dave McHugh nowadays?
If you don't mind, I'll back up. There was a time I worked full-time elsewhere. I'll get to a reason why I mentioned that. And really the roots of being able to stay with this were thanks to my bosses at Channel 2, WMAR in Baltimore. My sports guys knew that I did this other stuff and encouraged me to continue it. So if I had a game to announce at Goucher, my boss would say to me, go do the game and then just come back. You can still produce everything, because I would just get everything ready for the 11 p.m. show before. And then when I got back, I still had hour and a half or so to get the last minute things done. My boss knew that he was just going to have a little bit extra load that day, but then I was picking up the load somewhere else anyway, so it didn't matter. When I had Hoopsville and we restarted that, which we'll get to was for credit. When we restarted it, they encouraged me to keep doing it. When I worked other shifts and shifted to the news department, I was able to keep that going because they had given me a bedrock. They had given me a way of saying, you can do both. And so that's where my life took me. It was thanks to Scott Garceau and Keith Mills, who gave me that foundation of saying you can do both. So I made sure it worked in news. And then, of course, before my wife met me, I could do whatever I wanted, and it got even more ingrained. So nowadays, what I do. So I am a PA announcer, still for Goucher, but also now as a backup PA announcer for Navy and Towson and anybody else who comes calling. I am a former professional pro sports announcer for the Arena Football League. It was the announcer for Baltimore Brigade and Arena Bowl 31, which was awesome stuff. I'm a play-by-play guy. I do that for McDaniel Athletics. I do that as a backup for Navy Athletics, and for anybody else who comes calling, including the NCAA. I'll be doing men's and women's soccer yet again with Ira Thor coming up at the beginning of December for the Final Four for both. Obviously, I do it for basketball wherever I can get it, but including the Final Four for men's basketball. I also do it for the women's lacrosse Final Four for the most part. There's been a few years where I haven't. And again, anybody else who comes calling, color commentary when necessary on top of that for a lot of sports. I'm also a producer and director. That's still in my roots. I do a lot of work with World Team Tennis. That's a whole nother world and a whole nother story we'll tap dance on, but that's part of my life. And I have a job with Major League Baseball, which has nothing to do with any of those things. It literally nothing to do with it. I work technically for the Office of the Commissioner in game day compliance with a little bit of data operations on top of that, where I work in the stadiums and I work from home with Major League Baseball. And again, has nothing to do with broadcast, which confuses the hell out of people when I post things randomly about my MLB gig. This year ended up being really good for me in that sense. But yeah, it's freelance stuff for me. It's filling the holes. My wife doesn't always love it. Loves it when the checks come in, doesn't love it when I get breaks. And then I try and carve out the time for Hoopsville and everything else around that, which will be different this year because of the pandemic. I've gotten out of my routines, to be honest with you. It's going to be a little bit different of trying to get back into all that. So I think that answered the question.
It does. One of the things that people will hear from that is that, Dave, the rest of the guys that work at d3hoops.com or d3sports.com are all extremely busy outside of the stuff you see them do for Division III. One of the things I always talk about, Dave, and I want to see if you agree with this, I think you do, is that one of the keys to this whole thing is having, a family support network that understands this little passion you have around Division III, because I know for sure that the D3 stuff isn't paying the bills at home. Yeah, that other stuff is, right? And so how critical is it that your wife, that your family understands your passion around this and supports what you're doing?
Yeah, it's huge. And if she's listening to this, she's going to roll her eyes a little bit too. My wife, that is, Ann, because she knows it's almost too much of a passion, to be blunt, because sometimes I'm too dedicated to this stuff when I really should be dedicated to other things. And we'll talk about it here shortly, coming up here in November. I've got to go do another gig because it is the one that pays the bills. And I have to put D3 to the side for that in some capacity. We don't know the full extent of it. And that's just bad timing. Normally it's not there, but I try and make it work where my D3 stuff will work with everything else I'm doing. When it doesn't interfere, there's tons of support. It becomes challenging for the family, especially when I'm doing something, let's say like Hoopsville, that's carving out, I'm going to argue in the early part of the season, 20 hours a week. Late in the season, it probably closer to 40. And it isn't bringing in money. And let's be honest, not that that's the make or break of things. It isn't. But you have to be realistic on what you're doing and what you're willing to sacrifice or not sacrifice or whatever. And that's across the board. You're sacrificing family time, you're sacrificing work opportunities, you're sacrificing D3 stuff. One of those things, you can't do it all. And so I do have to make some tough decisions, and they're very supportive. Actually, we're hoping to get Andy involved, my oldest son, with the show as a way of being able to turn this into a teaching tool as well. But to be honest, I'm also trying to advertise. I'm trying to get advertisers and sponsors into the show to help a little bit with the costs of it. And there's costs of just putting the show on, right, just for the record. There's keeping the computer up to date. There's software that we use. There's stuff that we push out the door, social media stuff, editing equipment. I mean, you name it, it piles up. And so there's costs involved that we have to offset in some capacity. So it's a juggling act. And the support I get from my wife and family is enormous because the kids don't see me on a Sunday evening, but they're upstairs. You might see me roll my eyes when they're pounding on the floor a little too much.
One of the things I wanted to ask about, Dave, is playing off of this is, while it's fresh, so the fundraising effort for d3sports.com is something that I think everyone needs to be aware of. You know, everyone's used to all that content that you're getting from that network of sites, including what Dave does with Hoopsville. There was a Patreon effort started maybe about a year and a half ago. Is it fair to say that if people contribute to that some of those funds end up helping to support Hoopsville in particular?
In an indirect way. In an indirect way. Pat and I have had this relationship that the two entities are technically separate while being the same. And it's complicated because that same part is where the complication comes in. Our colors on Hoopsville are the same as D3 Hoops. That was by no mistake. Pat and I discussed the fact that they probably should be the same color, so that orange and blue look stays the same across the board. But I'm technically the owner and operator of Hoopsville, and Pat's the owner and operator of D3 Hoops. And we say Hoopsville presented by D3 Hoops because Pat is giving me the website space to put the show in place. So indirectly, yes, because if those websites go away, now I need to go find a place to land Hoopsville. And I already pay for, but speaking of costs, I pay for domains to do that, but I don't have a website. So Pat allows for that to happen. So yeah, you donate to Patreon, and indirectly you're assisting us having a platform as well. We have had our own fundraising efforts in the past before Pat did. We actually, behind the scenes, nobody knows this, we tap danced with Patreon ourselves, just didn't get it out the door before Pat. And to be honest with you, when Pat did, I decided, no, that's got to stay on its own. I don't want to be not double dipping, but I don't want to confuse people. And that's why we need to have the sponsor and advertising side of it. And we're going to make some changes with Blue Frame Tech to drive that a little bit indirectly as well. But again, yes, you donate to Patreon, you are assisting Hoopsville, not in a direct way, because I don't want to confuse the people out there, but in an indirect way, absolutely, because it gives us that landing space, as I say. And to be on top of that, a lot of the work I do behind the scenes, you don't realize, is ending up on D3 Hoops. You know, whether it's helping out with an article that's being written because I've got some information that's helpful, or what, I mean, we can go through a litany of examples, but yeah. So then I'm part of that group in that website that Patreon's helping us keep afloat as well.
So to support all the great things that happen with Hoopsville,
Yeah.
the program. Number one, advertise, right? Is
Yeah.
those that are watching this that own a business or have something to advertise, advertising revenue would be huge for
Absolutely. A
Hoopsville.
little bit for us and a little bit to you. I shouldn't say for us, a little bit for a company makes a huge difference to us.
Yeah.
And I keep striving that. And if all of a sudden we got 20 people who are making a little bit of a dent in their bottom line, it's making a huge dent in our bottom line.
So one, advertise. Two, the Patreon effort through
Yeah, absolutely.
d3swoots.com will end up supporting Hoopsville in
And
other
don't be
ways too.
surprised if my face starts showing up a little bit more in the Patreon. Pat and I have been discussing some things based on a recent podcast.
Well, I do like the subscriber content. Like the other day, I
Yeah.
watched Gordon and Ryan
Yeah.
talking about the All-American teams. So there's some cool things you get as a Patreon subscriber.
Absolutely.
You can do as little money as you want every month or as much. And so I'll just put that out there as
Absolutely.
a commercial for everyone that doesn't quite understand the financial aspect of all this stuff. Like if all of this stuff went away, people would sure miss it. And I want to make sure that they get a chance to support it and help it thrive in the future. Well, let's talk about Hoopsville. I think it's so funny. I was trying to think earlier. I texted you like, how many years has Hoopsville been on? I can picture where I was when I think Hoopsville started, like 5 houses ago. And I'm like, 5 houses ago, 12 Ardith Drive in Normal, Illinois. I guess
I'm
that
about
was,
there 4 or 5 places ago too.
yeah, it was. I think we figured out that this will be the 19th season of Hoopsville. The show technically originated 21 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So start from the beginning. How did Hoopsville start?
I mentioned earlier that I was working for this group called onAirSports.com. The building it now resides in is gone. If anybody's from the Mid-Atlantic area, Royal Farms has taken over the location. And they had dead air that they weren't using, or if it wasn't dead air, it was filler from some affiliate. I don't know. And again, this was the infancy of anything web related to broadcasting. Like putting a radio station online only was unheard of. I don't know if this was the first to do it or not. And I said, shoot, I got some time. I can use it. So I conned a buddy of mine who was a bench player for the Goucher men's basketball team, Jared Rosenbaum, and said, join me. Let's just go shoot. Let's go shoot it about D3. We know enough, don't we? We didn't know enough. We got on air. I if memory serves, it was November-ish of 2000.
That sounds right.
And we went on the air and we thought, oh, we'll read off scores. Of course, nobody can check the website we're checking to get those scores. Apparently, that was our thinking. I don't know. And I remember for the first few shows, we just chatted about what we were seeing. And I know I recorded those shows. I don't think I ever want to go back and listen to those shows because I am quite sure it was atrocious. We didn't know what we were talking about, but at some point, and I don't remember when, it might have been about the time Pat asked me to do color commentary for a game at Catholic, again for radio broadcast on the internet. Pat started kind of going, hey, why don't you call up Bob Quillman? Or, hey, why don't you call up Brock, Charlie Brock at Springfield? Or why don't you call up so-and-so and have them on the show? And of course, we have a full radio studio, so very easy to do. And that's when we started gaining traction. And we realized, okay, we can do something. And then we were able to assist D3 Hoops by having a place for the women's Final Four to broadcast out of via On Air Sports. Pat invited me down to the Final Four in Salem, which was 2001, which is when Catholic won its championship, which for me, a whole collection of things there combined to hook me hard. One, I know the team that won the championship. As much as it's a rival, Lonergan knew me too, their head coach, and he knew Jared. And so we were brought in immediately and said, yeah, you're covering it. You're one of us. And Pat gave us a chance to do pregame and postgame for shows, and we got hooked. I have not missed a Final Four since. And for me on men's basketball, I've gotten to one on the women's side, and it hooked. Now, On Air Sports went under a short time later. I don't remember if we had 2 seasons at On Air Sports or just one. That's where things get a little foggy. I was working like 3 part-time jobs at the time. And then it became full-time at Channel 2. But eventually we went dark for a couple of years. Hoopsville existed. We went to the Final Four and Hoopsville reemerged at the Final Four, but we weren't on the air during the season.
Right.
Then I actually hadn't completed my degree. And my alma mater came calling, and behind the scenes, there's a lot I can talk about that, but we don't need to get into it here. But there was a push that Dave needs his degree. Goucher, you're kind of complicit in this. Let's get it done. And I thought I needed A. It turns out I needed B. So B was do a project, get an A for that project, and you'll graduate. I'm like, all right, great. And so I said, they came up with a bunch of ideas. I said, you know what? Here's the thing. I'd like to bring my radio show back. My friend and high school, we have the same high school graduation, which is strange as a prep school. He created a radio station at Goucher. Let me go do my show there. Let this person who's in charge of my project make me do this better. Have him instruct me. He's a director in television. He has a radio background. Have him make my show better. And we'll start in January. We'll go through the end of March. That will be my project, etc. He called me up after show number 1, which included John Zeke's firing from Cabrini.
Right.
I woke up from a nap, never took a nap before Hoopsville ever since. I woke up from a nap with my phone ringing off the hook because John Zeke's going to be on the show because he's just gotten fired by the president. It's a whole thing. My advisor calls me up as I'm driving home and says, I don't care what you do for the rest of the year. You have your A. And I also had my platform. And we were at Goucher for a number of years after that. It hooked. We have not missed, quote unquote, a season since. Last year, certainly the pandemic year is a bit of a light year for us.
Right.
I got help from the NABC and others to build a studio. This is where the studio has been since we built it. It's had different forms and variations. I'm sure we'll be moving at some point, but yeah, technically we're entering our 19th year. I think unofficially 17th straight. I really have to go back into my documents, but there's a long convoluted answer to.
No, and what people
Get
need
off the
to
ground.
think through is where we were back at that time. You know, I think I found d3hoops.com right close to when it started, right? In like 97, 98.
Yep, same
I
as
found
me.
the message board. And then a couple of years later is now we merge with where you're talking about with Hoopsville coming on board. I remember that show you're talking about with Coach Zeke getting, I remember like how that was like great journalism. Like it was an amazing show. And I remember, you know, AOL Instant Messenger, right?
Yeah, we use
Like,
that a ton.
message the show. And
Yeah.
at that time, there was no other Division III media. To
be honest, there wasn't any until about 5 years ago.
there wasn't anything out there in a way for people to follow their teams before what
Right.
Pat created, then what Dave built onto and created. So again, I just try to make sure people understand the context of all this because there's still not a lot of other Division III media out there. There's a small number of us that are connected, kind of friends of the program, I like to say,
Yeah.
that kind of do things that are connected with you guys unofficially. There's not another d3hoops.com out there.
No.
There's not another Hoopsville out there. I just want people to realize how important that stuff is to how we're following all this. Another question on Hoopsville. I think one of the things you guys have done incredibly well is you've balanced coverage of men's and women's basketball extremely well. Was that an intention right from the get-go, and talk through that decision to make sure you had that great balance?
Absolutely. But we worked towards it. I wouldn't say from the get-go we were good at it. We started a little we were very men's basketball heavy. And that was unintended. It just happened. Jared's a men's basketball player, so he knew men's basketball. We went to the men's basketball Final Four. We were following men's basketball. We didn't ignore women's basketball. We certainly talked about it, but Jared didn't know how to talk. And I'm not trying to be to diminish Jared, but he didn't know anything about the women's basketball side, and I barely knew anything about the women's basketball side. I don't remember when it happened specifically. But at some point I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm doing 3 men's interviews to 1 women's interview a show. Let's just say I'm making up a number. and the women's side's just as spectacular. And I need to balance this. And so I have, now this season's going to get really crazy, but I had a rotation. I decided, okay, we're doing 2 shows a week. I'm going to split the regions because there's no way I can cover everything if I don't. And I'm going to split gender. So if I talk, and I'm going to go use the old regions just for ease here. If I talk New England on Sunday and I talk to a men's program in the NESCAC, then next Sunday I'm talking to a women's program, but not in the NESCAC. I need to find somebody else. If I'm talking Central Region on Sunday and I talk Illinois Wesleyan women's basketball, great. I've covered the CCIW women's basketball, but next week I'm covering men's basketball in a different conference. And I did that specifically because if I didn't, and I mean this seriously, if I didn't, we'd be talking about the top 25 teams and the top of Division III every single show, right, repeating the same stuff all the darn time. One thing I don't like about talk radio is I will tune in to talk radio and I hear the same damn storylines every single day. They are beating things into the ground when there's other things to talk about. And that's not all talk radio. I'm being very generic. So I made a conscious decision, and then I reinforced that decision when I was trying to court the WBCA to join what the NABC had done in supporting the show in many facets. And one of the things I said right from the get-go was, A, we already do a lot of women's basketball coverage on this show, and I want to do more. The B part was I want to do more. And their help allowed us to do more. And so absolutely. But here's the thing. The men's game's great. So is the women's game. And I've been around the women's game for a long time. And the things I don't like about the men's game, I love in the women's game. Now, don't get me wrong. There's things in the women's game that drive me nuts. There's rule differences that drive me nuts. But that's not neither here nor there. There are women student athletes who are just as good, if not better than the men's. Why aren't we shining the light on them?
It's a great point you make about not only the gender balance, but the region and geographic balance of what you've done. And I think what that's done for people is, even if at first you didn't think like, oh, I'm not interested in the Centennial Conference, I'm a CCIW guy.
Yeah.
It really kind of forced you to learn about the whole picture. So yes, if I didn't know anything about the Northwest Conference or the ODAC, through Hoopsville, I'm hearing interesting people talking, coaches, SIDs, media members, whoever you had on, both genders. And even if I didn't set out to learn about other parts of the country and the women's game, let's say, Hoopsville allowed me to do that and allowed me to realize that it was super interesting, and the women's game is as good as the men's game, and all leagues have their own cool stuff to learn. Is that something
but Bob, it also taught me,
right? Because you have to.
I learned from this too. I'm trying to learn not inadvertently. Really, to be honest with you, sometimes this is about me, and I'm not trying to be selfish. I'm trying to say, I'm trying to learn about these other teams. I'm trying to learn about aspects of the women's game, or about different regions, or about different conferences, not only to help others out there learn about them, but so I can be better educated.
And wouldn't you agree, Dave, that as someone that's been, dabbling in a podcast for a little bit now and doing interviews like this, primarily with coaches or former players, whatever, the preparation you have to do a credible job is where you really, learn. I'm thinking I had Raul Placeres from Maryville on a week ago, and just to have that be a credible interview, I mean, I had to spend a lot of time understanding Maryville's background, his background. I can't imagine the time you have spent over 21, 22 years, not just doing the interviews, but the prep that went into it. It takes a lot of work to do that the way you've done it, correct?
Oh yeah. And I got it. It's appropriate that you bring that up on this week. It's a time to thank SIDs. And I'll take that now to thank SIDs, because there are numerous SIDs out there who help prepare me, because they'll either send the information ahead of time and say, Dave, you've got so-and-so on, here are a bunch of notes for you, so that it saves me the time from diving into their website. Or they contact me and go, hey, listen, you really should talk to so-and-so. Right. Or no, some of it's them selfishly trying to promote their programs. God bless them. Go ahead. And sometimes I can't get them on right away. I'm trying to balance when to have teams on. Trust me, there is a juggling act behind the scenes. But yeah, I need to be prepared. And trust me, there are times, and you can probably tell in interviews when I'm not as prepared as I should be, that I am shooting from the hip because I didn't have enough time that week, but I still needed to put a show on. And my producer, there is no producer. It's me. I'm the one who has to go and find that. And what I'm trying to say is there's so many shows on the air, nationally especially, where they've got a litany of people behind the scenes getting all that prep work done for them. And so, no, I've got to do it. And that's another thing that people don't consider is, yeah, I put 2 hours on the air, but it probably takes me 10 hours officially of getting that show ready to go. I'm guesstimating because there's promotion, which I'm trying to augment. There's reaching out to schools to get guests lined up. There is the aspect of analyzing and trying to learn things more. I also lean on the team. Pat, Gordon, and Ryan will give me wealth of information to write on. So yeah, no, that is the biggest part of it. And that's also a part I love. Getting to learn things that I find are cool. If you hear me say something on the air, it's because I find it interesting. So I think you might find it interesting. I didn't find that because I just happened to stumble into it. I went and looked for it.
You mentioned that we're a couple days away here from the debut of the 19th season of Hoopsville, Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. I know you don't have that all buttoned down yet, but what would you like to tell people about the 21-22 season of Hoopsville, what they can expect? Just give them a little preview of how you want the season to go here.
Hard-hitting, arrogant action. I'm just kidding. We're gonna augment a few things. The first show out of the gate, we always like to try and talk to the number ones. We're reaching out to them, the preseason number one teams, to have their coaches on the air. We're going to hear from Pat and Gordon. We hope we'll get you and Ryan, I hope, back into the mix a little bit with the top 25. We're going to change a little bit of our advertising system, running ads, thanks to Blue Frame Technology and the partnership we have with them. I want to get more students on the show. I'll admit that's the one thing we don't do a good job at. There's a lot of reasons behind it. Some of them are my own fault. And I'm hoping to change that this year. And again, leaning on SIDs to know who the best interviews are. And this isn't a knock. I just said you might have the best player on the team. Doesn't mean they're the best person to talk to about that team. And that's just reality. And not everybody can do that kind of thing. And whatever. But we're going to try and have more of them on. November is going to be interesting. We were planning on having shows every Sunday and Thursday like normal, but I've gotten called away to a gig. Don't feel sorry for me, but I'll be in Palm Springs, California.
That's a tough one.
It's a tough one, but it pays the bills, especially as my Major League Baseball job, which was really helpful this offseason, comes to a close. I need to take the gig. So we were going to try and figure out how to do it. You might see some shows from me in my hotel room, not live, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pull those off from the West Coast, but we'll figure it out. We'll get some shows on the air. December, we'll do a good job of doing some shows leading into the holidays. And of course, in January, it's gangbusters. We hit the accelerator and we go hard all the way to the end of March. And I don't know what we'll do. Last full season, we were dabbling about not doing courtside shows in Fort Wayne. It's a lot of work. With not a lot of return, and that's not a negative. It's just not a lot of people tune in. But we'll see. But we're going to be back. Our goal is 2 shows a week, 2 hours per show. How we divvy up the regions, I haven't figured out yet. There's 10 now. Might make things a little bit more difficult. We might have to kind of shoot from the hip. We will early on. Early on, we won't stick to the regions. We'll just go with where we have some interesting stories. And we already have a couple. Like, I'll tease this one. I don't know how I'm going to pull it off, but there's 2 women's teams, one coached by a man, one coached by a woman. We're facing off in the beginning of the season. The coaches are married.
Sweet.
Don't think that's ever happened.
That could get super dicey.
So we'll get them on the show. Let's talk. Now, it might be after the fact, but still it'll be fun.
In November, I'd like to request some kind of on location content where you're like in front of a mid-century modern house with a mountain in the background and a palm tree. I want to see Palm Springs in the show as much as you can.
I'll see if I can spin the camera shot so you can see the place.
I don't know if that's possible, but I like it.
It would be great.
Let's shift gears a little bit to some current stuff. 21-22. Feeling good about, coming off of the last 2 seasons, obviously 19-20, we get shut down heading into the Sweet 16 last year. We have a sort of season for some teams. no tournament. Feeling pretty good here, feeling pretty normal in terms of what's about to happen in Division III. Opening day is tomorrow. We're taping this on Thursday the 4th. Tomorrow the 5th, the first games roll, and then it's on. Your preseason top 25 ballot, that was difficult. We're both voters in the poll.
Difficult's being kind,
Yeah,
sir.
walk me through that. Like, how did you approach trying to figure out who to vote for in that preseason men's poll that we vote on?
We joke on the show for years that I just threw darts at a dartboard sometimes because I don't know the right spot for people. I should never have been using that analogy because this preseason was coming. I could be dead wrong on my top 25. I'll just be blunt because we have so many factors we haven't considered. And as I heard Pat say on another podcast recently, we're going to be dealing with this for years to come, for several years to come, because you've got teams like Swarthmore who saw the writing on the wall and basically the entire team took a gap year to come back this year. Okay, great. But it's 2 years removed. What does that really mean for a team like Swarthmore? Are they good? They lost 2 good guys, though I know they were bringing in some studs in the recruiting class. And I don't get into recruiting that much, to be honest. But they've also not technically played for 2 years. As I was talking to another coach the other day, he said, we haven't been able to stay on them about fundamentals and what we want for a year and a half.
Right.
Yeah, we got to dabble a little bit here, but normally we get X amount of time and they can stick with it. We're all frustrated in preseason because nothing's going right. Well, of course not. Everybody's gotten into some bad habits in the last year and a half.
They're a great example because 18-19, they play in the national championship game.
Right.
And then we weren't even completely sure, when I guess going the next year,
1920, they've been number one the entire season. One. Yeah.
But then coming into 2021, had there not been COVID, we weren't sure exactly were they going to be number 1 caliber, number 25 caliber, because they lost some key guys. Now you add in that they didn't play.
Right.
So
as another coach said to me, you literally, for a lot of teams, for the majority of Division III, to be blunt, the majority of Division III, you have 2 classes who have not played a meaningful game.
Right.
Of recruits. So you have 2 freshman classes that have not played a meaningful game. What does that mean? Like, are they going to play well? Are they not going to play well? Are we going to have growing pains? Are teams, a team's going to be good early because they gelled and then have injuries like we always deal with? Or are we going to have teams that just look horrible early on and then come January go, oh, I know how to do this, and come roaring into the conversation?
It's almost like you got to figure out in a normal year when you're doing your top 25 poll, you kind of look at the year before, who was really good at the end of the year, and then of that group, who returned most of their team. It becomes not easy, but there's a path there. This year, you have to do that, but then you also have to figure out from 2 seasons ago.
You have to extrapolate from 2 years ago. Right.
So like in the NESCAC didn't play, UAA didn't play. You're trying to figure out like, oh, let's see. Well, WashU, okay, Emory, they were good. And then I think they returned those guys. What a crapshoot of a preseason ballot it was. It was tough.
You have Wheaton, goes undefeated last season, and I'm using that in air quotes for those who aren't watching the video. Goes undefeated. Okay, I'm not trying to knock because I've talked to Shower about this, but is it because they stumbled into a team who was COVID riddled and didn't have enough players, or was
actually I need to point out they lost 1 game there at the end of the year.
That's true. That's a good point.
I remember watching that one.
But are they as good as that record, or was it because they got some breaks that went their way? And I'm not knocking them because they won it. Then you look at a team like Trine, who supposedly played in the quasi national championship at Randolph-Macon, and nothing. The final score doesn't show how much Macon absolutely, in my opinion, trucked them in that game.
They dominated that game.
Yeah, that was Macon all the way. So you have so many. But does that mean Wheaton is that good, or smoke and mirrors? Is Trine that good? Smoke and mirrors. And I'm just picking 2 because I can go through 50 teams and raise questions about all 50 that make me completely unsure about how I was ranking. I think I was confident in maybe my top 2 or 3. And I say confident that they deserve to be my top 25. After that, God help us. because
Yeah, I was the same. I was good till about, I felt good about my top 5 or so, maybe 6. And then from there, I thought it was very difficult
yeah,
to make the
and I'm
ballot.
sure I'm missing somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it's just but the good
And
thing is, look, we're going to get games, and there's some really good matchups where good teams are playing good teams
yes,
in November
and
and
December,
certainly
yeah,
in December. So we're going to get a lot of that. Let me ask you another question here about the new regional alignment.
yeah.
So we've
Something
moved,
that we forgot about that was coming for a while.
yeah, we've moved from the old system everyone was familiar with, the Northeast and the Central and the South. We've moved to 10 regions, correct? And they're numbered. I still don't have this
Yeah,
down.
1 through 10. I don't have it down either.
I don't know what number region that like
I'm gonna
Illinois
have to
Wesleyan's in.
post it somewhere within my eyesight so I can see it.
What is your thought on the move to the new regional alignment? What does that bring to us? Is it good? Is it bad? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's good nor bad. I think it had to happen. I think you can look at some regions. New England is always the easy one to pick out, but the South region even was a little bit, I don't want to say unbalanced, but ridiculous. I mean, New England was way too big, as we always have argued, whereas the South was way too drawn out. Now, you can't fix all those things. And we talked about the Central with the WIAC and the CCIW being together too. You can look at a lot of examples, and the way Division III has grown, and when they decided to look at all the other sports, and that's the key here. We had to look at other sports. Football is at 4, and you had conference like the Centennial being matched up against an ASC. I mean, it's Mid-Atlantic and Texas. Couldn't be anywhere,
Right.
different. You had sports now, they were changing it, but men's lacrosse, it was stuck at 2. Now, luckily, they were changing before they were forced to change, but they were stuck at 2 for way too long with 200 plus programs. We needed to shuffle things up. Absolutely. And the other thing that people don't realize about the regional thing that is also now in place is now there's also guidelines, rules, whatever you want to call in place, that when schools enter, conferences change, whatever the case, decisions about where they should be are more concrete. There's a guideline. Okay, then do this. Whereas in the past, it was like, oh, I mean, for this sport, it makes sense to do that. With that sport, it makes sense to do this. And we had a hodgepodge. So sports like soccer and basketball, yeah, they grew to 10. It doesn't make a difference in the grand scheme of things. Now, people make the argument that, oh my goodness, that means so-and-so is going to get to the table and maybe jump this other team that they were behind normally in regional rankings. No. If a regional ranking said A should be first and B should be second, then if A and B come to the table in different regions, A is still going to be first and B is still going to be second when that conversation takes place. If it doesn't, that's a different conversation. So in the grand schemes, I don't think it changes anything. It does add more people to the committee. I think
Right.
that's interesting and helpful because there's less likelihood of, especially in women's basketball, where a lot of coaches are administrators, of losing individuals off the conversation at the national level when their teams are involved, whether it's bracketing, where the women's committee is, and I don't want to say committee in general, but the NCAA perspective is much tighter, that if you're in the tournament, you're not even involved in bracketing. Whereas on the men's side, they're a little bit more lenient. We can go into that another time.
And you bring up a good point, and I think this is another thing that the D3sports.com crew has done a good job of reminding us that these decisions aren't made just for the sport that we find that to be our favorite. So let's say I'm a men's basketball guy. These sports aren't made just for basketball, men's and women's. These are all sports type decisions. It involves
football
much
went
more.
from 4 regions to 6, and they had to augment it a little bit. That's within themselves, but no, this was across sports.
Yeah,
I don't think one sport got untouched in this deal.
Right. These are decisions that a lot of people are in their own little world here of their favorite sport, the sport that their son or daughter plays, or that their alma mater is the best in. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, tied into that, the new regional ranking process.
Yeah.
Through which, and let's talk men's basketball to make it easier.
Sure.
Usually somewhere late season, we start getting regional rankings that come out. And there was a change now to where the first one of those is going to be an alphabetical ranking. So instead of there being a ranking that comes out for region 7 that ranks team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., it will list all the teams that got ranked but we won't know the true order of the ranking. It'll just be listed alphabetically. I think I know why they did that. What are your thoughts on the move to that? Is it good? Is it bad? Do you have questions? What's your take?
Well, first off, it's a trial. So it's whatever committee wants to do it can do it this year. In the fall, we've seen everybody do it. I don't expect, I'd be surprised if anybody doesn't do it, to be honest with you. It's a trial to see how it goes this year. It's sponsored and pushed by men's basketball, which at first disappointed me greatly, because men's basketball has been the most transparent in my experience. And it certainly led the way from what I've heard from a national level, men's basketball, which is saying something considering 15 years ago. And so this looked to me as non-transparent. This looked at hiding. And it's interesting because Pat and I did a crossover podcast together between football and hoops. And I talked to Mike Schauer, who's the committee chair out of Wheaton for men's basketball. And we had a frank conversation, and I loved it. And this is why I love doing it. But behind the scenes, by the way, we could talk about all the other hours I'm spending on the telephone with people. Mike thought they were trying to be more transparent. And his argument was, we know when we're putting together the regions for week 1, that they're bunk. That we know when we're done with region 2 and we move on, we get to region 6 and start looking at things, we go, oh my goodness, we would never rank region 2 the way we did if we had this information. And they're talking about results versus regionally ranked opponents, which is, we know in week 1 cannot be used because we don't have results versus regionally ranked opponents. It's not a data point that is there until the rankings are finalized, and then you're not going back and revisiting it, or it would never end. They do at the very end. That's a different conversation. They're trying to finalize rankings. They do it one more time. And so he said, listen, we know by the data points that team wouldn't be number 2 in X region, because the data points now tell us they shouldn't be ranked. But the data points when we started this process that didn't have VRRO tells us they should be. And so he felt like they were giving out bad intel, which we all knew about. We all just dealt with it. We all said, listen,
So in other words, let me just
regionally ranked opponents.
make sure I'm saying this right, is that in the old world, the one where you get regional ranking 1 for men's basketball, and you get, let's say, 7 teams listed in a region, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the order of the ranking. The problem with week 1 is that it doesn't include the regionally ranked opponents data. Results. Because that is always looking backwards a week.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist in week 1. So the ranking itself is not very accurate, because then you get to the next week and they add that, and you see all this shuffling from week 1 to week 2.
Shuffles. And it's, Bob, you know my show on Thursday, the first thing I say out of my mouth is, remember, regional rankings are out. It's great. Remember, results versus regionally ranked was not a factor in these rankings. Next week, it'll be a factor. It'll change. You're going to see huge shifts. You're going to see differences. That number 1 team is going to be number 3. That number 2 team is not even going to be ranked, and blah, 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 blah. And then they'll toss out week 1, and it confuses everybody. So I understood where Mike Schauer was coming from. He's saying, listen, we know these rankings are bogus. We wouldn't rank that way if we had all the data. So they're trying to say, listen, we understand that. So here are the teams that at least were in the conversation. I understand that argument. My problem with it is, and Pat has said this as well, we lose a ranking. So week 1, we only get 3 public rankings before the end of the final season, and the last one comes out when bracketing's done. So the last 3 weeks, we get 3 regional rankings. And listen, we've seen why you shouldn't have 5 or 6, because the data in January is all over the place. And we've seen when we did once ranked, always ranked, a team gets all the benefits of week 1 from guys who never show up ranked again because their data is so poor. So my argument to Mike Schauer, my argument to other committees in other sports is, okay, I get your premise. Totally fine with me. But let's do it during what we call the mock week. The week before, when the committees get together.
So add a ranking at the beginning. That's the
add
alphabetical.
A pre-ranking. It's just a pre-ranking. It's the same thing. We're going to list them alphabetical. This just lets you know that you guys had enough data points to at least be in this conversation. Then week 1, when it's official comes out, guess what we now have? Results versus regionally ranked opponent data. And listen, what Mike Schauer stressed, and I think this is important, it's not like they have the alphabetical list public and they're working off of a numbered list in the background. They aren't. Because first off, remember, everything gets erased anyway. They start from scratch every week. but they're not working off of when they have this alphabetized list. They aren't going, okay, behind the scenes, they were actually number one. So this result versus regionally ranked is against the number one. As Mike pointed out to me, that data is already there. That data, when we start breaking it down, we can already tell who's a better regionally ranked opponent because we're looking at the other data that gives us that information. Right. So let's go the pre-rank 1 week earlier. It's just a pre-ranking. It gives you a sense of who's in the mix to fill in the hole that we don't have in week
I like
one.
that, because what you're saying, I think we agree that the first regional ranking as it is, the one without regionally ranked opponent data, that one is a little bit worthless because it doesn't have one of the major criterion.
Right. And it impacts week 2.
And so we agree there. And then I didn't think about it the way that you are, which is we're losing a ranking. So I'm with you that let's keep the number of in order rankings where they are. Mm-hmm. On the front end, do the alphabetical thing. Great idea. Wonderful idea. So I think I'm with you there. I understand why you're saying that. And I agree with that. I don't want to lose a ranking either, because I don't know, as a fan, as someone that's following it, I think you want to understand, where does everyone stand on Pool C as we go through those weeks, those critical weeks?
Yeah, as a fan, as a media, yeah.
Yeah,
but even as coaches.
Yeah, as a coach,
you're waiting till week 2 to get a numerical one that you don't understand the data from the get-go because it's alphabetized. So now let's fill in week 1. Let's fill the hole that's there. Give us a pre-ranking. Listen, the pre-ranking is not perfect either because it doesn't have results versus regionally ranked. But we understand that because it's a pre-ranking. We're not taking an official ranking that is that has ramifications of at least another week. So we don't get numbered until week 2. We're 2 weeks out to the end of the season. I think it just gets a little quirky. And to be honest with you, there's some committees too that don't have the greatest reputation. So this gives us a pre-ranking, fills in the hole for week 1, and bang, we have a legitimate week 1 ranking that we don't have to sit there and talk about. People want to argue the pre-ranking, fine. I'm not going to argue the pre-ranking. The pre-ranking is a pre-ranking. It's got pre for a reason. And the committees, even in the mock weeks, are still working through their committees to get them on the same page. So it's not like we're changing anything. We're just not putting out a numerical number.
Good point. I'm with you on both fronts there. Just as we start to wrap up, first of all, thank you for all of the time here, and just a couple more questions as we start to wrap this thing up. What are you most looking forward to as we head into 21, 22? I know that's a very open-ended question, but what are you looking forward to?
I'll be dorky and just say games. Monday. Now, for starters, let me get this off my chest. I hate when our season's starting. It was a loophole I saw coming when they shifted the season twice and said November 8th, if it falls on a weekend or a Monday, you can play the Friday before. I hated it. I hated it from the jump. And I've said I've hated it from the jump. Me personally, I'd rather see it 2 Fridays before Thanksgiving, lock it in there. That's not perfect, I realize, but it's a little bit better. And I know there's quirks about how, time off at Christmas and all this, but if we move to the days thing that the coronavirus is allowed versus weeks, I think we can get around that. Long story short, I just hate that we're starting this early, plain and simple. Technically, we're starting before D1. Oh, anyway, I'm looking forward to games. I'm going to be in a gym PA announcing on Monday. I didn't get to PA announce a D3 game last year. And I've been PA announcing since 95. Being able to see games online, talking to coaches about non-coronavirus stuff. We'll still be talking about the pandemic. We'll still be talking about the virus implications because we're going to get games canceled. We're going to get games postponed. We're going to have some impacts. It's reality. But I'm not calling coaches up going, are you playing? I'm not calling coaches up, how many games you plan on playing? I'm not getting calls from coaches, how many games do I need to have? If we don't play, do I need to have them count? As much as I like being a resource and as much as I like going to get out the information, I'm looking forward to getting back into just the basketball talk.
Yeah.
And then crowning a champ. We had the best bracket in the world in 2020 going on the mat.
We sure was.
It is, Pat talks about last year being gutting. I saw last year coming. The previous year to me is the gutting one because we had incredible work by the committee done. I'm looking forward to at least trying to get back there. That's what I'm looking for. And that's on the men's side. The women's side, I'm just looking to see what may have changed. To be honest, is Amherst as good as they usually are? And I'm not sure because I think the entire NESCAC took a hit based on the institutions they are. I work for Navy. Navy doesn't have anybody who's red shirts a season. They go on despite the pandemic because they can't miss. There's a lot of NESCACs. Those students are done. And so how are things going to flip on their head? Transfers from all divisions coming to Division III to get one more year. Guys transferring to other schools to get one more year. We're on our head, and it's just going to be more like, oh my goodness, for a couple of months. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
It's such a great point. I think where we were a year ago at this point, early November of 2020, and it was so depressing. I remember you guys did a Hoopsville episode where you were, I can't remember what month that was, but walking through the possibilities of there being a tournament versus no tournament. Yeah. It was 100% clear to me that you guys were 100% sure that there would not be a tournament, and you were dead right.
I would argue I was the one.
Yeah.
So who was probably 90% sure there was no tournament. Everybody else thought there was a chance. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I was just working too hard and getting too much information that was screaming no, no, no. And I hated reporting that.
And I
Bob, I'll tell you right now, when I tweeted the tournament was off before it was public, I knew what I was sending. And I felt horrible. I felt gutted. I was doing my job. My job is to get the information out there. How you can relate me to any of the top pro guys you want. I don't care. My point was, I knew that tweet was coming. I knew that story was going to have to be written. And behind the scenes, I was saying it for months because the writing was on the wall. And I felt horrible for what I was having to report.
And that's sort of where we were a year ago, is like, I remember listening to that Hoopsville, watching that Hoopsville and leaving it feeling like, boy, does this suck. And now that we're here a year later, and hey, I'm talking to people about going up to Illinois Wesleyan's SICMA Invitational Tournament with fans in the Shirk Center, and things going on before and after the game, and all these, teams that are kicking off their season Friday, and cool things going on with fans. And so, hey, fingers crossed that.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. I got my booster shot the other day. I'm a little nervous that we got some rough road ahead, being that we're heading into the, traditionally the sicker time of the year. I hope not to have my hopes up too high, because I think the pandemic has taught us a lot about being a little more realistic. But I also never want to experience March 12th and March 13 again.
Yeah. That was
personally and professionally. I never want to go through that again.
Well said. And I think that better times are in front of us.
Yeah.
It feels like that we're in a much better place now. We'll hope for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Dave. And, you've done so much for Division III and continue to. Just on behalf of the D3 community, want to say thank you for everything you've done with Hoopsville and everything related to it.
Appreciate
people. Yeah, people appreciate it. It's there's not a lot of other outlets to go to for this stuff. And so, I will encourage people to continue to support Hoopsville through sponsorship, through Patreon, all of those things, because it's really important to this world. Now, I don't know if you know this, Dave, but I always allow my guests the final word. And so before I end this wonderful QCast today, I'd like to give you a chance to say anything you'd like to your admirers, your supporters, the Hoopsville fans, the Dave McHugh fans. The final say is yours, my friend.
I think you got that from somebody.
Correct.
First and foremost, we hope to hit the air on Sunday. What date is that? I can't even keep track of dates anymore. 7th, I think. 7 p.m. Eastern. You may see my son in the background as we try and bring him into the mix. I'm really looking forward to being back on the air, and we're going to have great partners like the NABC, WBCA, D3 Hoops on board, and we hope to bring more on as well. Blue Frame Technology. I say that genuinely because they are the ones who are helping us stay on the air, and I'm looking forward to the season. I'm looking forward to having you on the show. I'm looking forward to having coaches, student athletes. and doing the big stuff and having fun doing it and interacting with the people we haven't interacted with in a long time. So I'm really looking forward to that. But what I really would like to take this moment for is to thank everybody for their support. We're not doing this show. We're not doing what we do if it's to nobody, if no one's listening, if no one's tuning in. I encourage people to tune in more often. I'd love to see more people tuning into the show, not just because their favorite coach or program is on, but also because we're trying to educate you as much as we're educating ourselves. We're going to keep you in the loop. So, and I want to thank all those seriously for supporting the efforts of Pat Coleman, Gordon Mann, Brian Scott, myself, Bob Quillman, whoever, because we're doing it because we love it. And we love shining a light on a division that we feel doesn't get enough light, and it still doesn't get enough light despite the light we're trying to shine on it. And if we are doing a good enough job, you say so, and obviously you say so because we're still doing that job. And so I want to thank everybody out there, and most importantly, I want to thank my family, who I say that all the time. I can't do this without them as well. Or guests like yourself who come on the show and sometimes push me to my limit because my brain's too tired or I'm off on a completely weird tangent.
And I still swear you can't say Buena Vista, but I mean,
Buena Vista, that one I've got now.
You got it. You got it.
I've got BU now.
Folks, 19 years
ago.
ago.
Others that we might run into.
19 years ago, this guy could not say Buena Vista. He can.
No, it was Vista, man. I stopped trying.
He changed it to Vista because he gave up
Vista
on the first word. It was great. Hoopsville.
No, I couldn't do
Folks,
it.
that is season 2, episode 4 of the QCast. Thank you so much to Dave McHugh of Hoopsville. And when I tweet this, I'll tweet all the links to Hoopsville, everything you need to know, including about Patreon and some mention of sponsoring Hoopsville. So Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. Really enjoyed the time, especially being on the flip side.